Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Aberlour event called Just Listen to Parents. This is a special event that we've arranged during the election campaign, and it really is an opportunity for parents that Aberlour or carers that Aberlour support to come along and make their voices heard, and also ask some questions of some prospective candidates in the forthcoming Scottish elections. Delighted to welcome 4 representatives from 4 of the main parties. Unfortunately, the Scottish Conservatives, albeit invited, chose not to send anybody along, but all the other main parties have done that, and we're deeply grateful for that. We've got Alison Johnson from the Greens and Paul O'Kane from Labour. Alison and Paul were both on last week's chat with young people as well, so we're delighted you've come back for more. And we've also got Claire Adams from the SNP and Carol Ford from the Lib Dems. So the kind of format for today is that I'll ask each of the politicians to take 2 minutes really just to describe what their commitment as a party is to children and families in Scotland in its broadest sense, but also specifically for children and families that find it hardest to reach out for support or find extra support from education, from health, or from social care, and what it is they think their party offers that means that they've got some kind of advantage. After that, I will introduce Paul and Donna, who are respectively parents and carers for children that Aberlour support, who will speak for a few minutes about the things that matter most to them, but they'll also ask the politicians specific questions. So that's going to be the format today. It's very similar to the last event that we held. I mean, I suppose what would be helpful for the politicians as well is to understand that Aberlour has a very clear commitment to supporting families in Scotland, supporting families that often find it hardest to reach the people that they need because of the barriers and some of the difficulties that are created by our systems. And we're really keen to make sure that our families get the right support at the right time from the right people in the right kind of ways. And part of what we've committed to is making sure that publicly, whenever we can, that we take an opportunity to step back and actually give voice to young people and to families who otherwise would not, frankly, have a voice. And this event is primarily about that. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Alison Johnson if she can take 2 minutes really to cover what she thinks the Greens were going to offer for children and families across Scotland. Thanks, Alison.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sally Ann, and I'm really pleased to be here today. I think if you've not been involved in hustings day in, day out, you maybe won't appreciate how refreshing this format is, because I really do feel it's relaxed and it gives us an opportunity to listen to the children and young people without, getting on our high horses or getting into some unhelpful debate. So for me, the event was that only last week with the young people was
2 weeks ago, I think.
It was just amazing. I felt I learned a lot for sure. I think throughout the Scottish Green Party's manifesto, we have so many commitments that aim to make life easier for families, for parents and for young people across Scotland, whether that's the fact that, we've managed to introduce free bus travel for everyone aged 21 and under, that'll kick in this summer, whether we've convinced the government through our budget negotiations to expand provision of free school meals so that all in primary school will soon be in receipt of them, and that's just not just during school periods, but during holiday periods as well, where we often forget. It's not as if somebody suddenly becomes, well off just because school isn't meeting. I think our work in social security, we had a manifesto commitment to a young carers grant in our last manifesto, which the government, to their credit, picked up quickly. That's been delivered. We'd like to see that young carer grant doubled in this session of Parliament from 300 to 600. We'd like the carers allowance to be uprated to £105 at least. We're well aware of the 13 billion or so pounds of added value that carers give to the economy. And let's face it, if people aren't caring, then the economy grinds to a halt and none of us can get out and do what we do. We have commitments for additional support needs teachers in our school, and over 5,000 teachers in our school, because I think this is key to delivering an equitable education for all. We obviously want to tackle the climate emergency, and I've no doubt at all that the fact that young people are fully engaged in this debate means that governments, parliamentarians are sitting up and taking notice. And we have to, because we have a matter of years before that becomes catastrophic and runaway. And also through this, I think as we recover from the pandemic, we want a fair recovery from the pandemic, but one that also looks at the climate emergency and acknowledges that there are lots of jobs here. So whether that's in the care sector, because there are huge shortages, many vacancies, or whether it's in renewables, you know, there will be opportunities here for young people who often don't get a chance. And I think that was made very clear to us at the call the other week with Aberlour's young people, because we're letting too many people, we're not taking advantage of their skills, and they are losing out, and they are being left further and further behind and away from that labour market. I mean, we want to see a kindergarten stage introduced at school. We know that the best performing education systems in the world don't begin formal education until the age of 7, and we'd like a play-based approach up until then. We know how many advantages it has, and we only have to see the stress our young people went through last year when they were, you know, faced with a lack of clarity about decisions around exams. We really support the work that's been done with the care review. You know, we're determined to keep the promise, and I'd just like to see more of a focus on love and compassion in the debates that we have in Parliament, because I think, you know, we can get a bit caught up in statutory rights and rules and regulations, but we have to always bear in mind that these are young people, and these are families who are striving to do their best to deliver for these young people. I'll leave it there, though. Very much looking forward to the discussion this afternoon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alison. I'm going to move on now to Carol Ford from the Lib Dems.
Well, good afternoon. I'm just going to say a little bit about myself and then about how this translates into what the Liberal Democrats are thinking about in their manifesto. I started my career as a maths teacher, and I was fortunate. I came through a very financially secure childhood, but I was very aware of the background of both my parents, my father in the Gorbals, my mother in Possil, growing up during the Depression. And when I graduated from university, I decided I was going to be a maths teacher because I could save the world by the teaching of maths. And that's exactly what I tried to do. And I started out in the Gorbals because I thought, this is where I can really contribute. And what I found as I went through my career, I ended up as a secondary head teacher, was that the challenges that many young people have are not just down to financial challenges, but down to things, events that happen in their lives and circumstances that are completely beyond their control and their parents' control, and that these events can actually derail a child's chances in education and chances thereafter. And so now I no longer think I can save the world through the teaching of mathematics. I've now come into politics because I would really like, there are still so many things that I would like to see changed in the way that society treats children and young people. Now, my party is totally committed to the whole issue around mental health and well-being. We think that's a key issue, not just for young people, but for society in general. And we've got specific manifesto pledges around that, about training double the number of mental health counsellors and having counsellors in all sorts of locations, in accident and emergency, in police stations, in schools and colleges, and GP surgeries. Because one of the key things that we've identified as an issue is pathways. And Sally Ann kind of referred to that. If you go to the wrong place for help, you might hit a brick wall. And we want there to be no wrong place to go. That wherever you go, if you've got an issue, that person can either help you there and then, or they know where you can go to get that help. Now, as a head teacher, I had a lot of young people who had serious issues, and I didn't have a huge number of pathways that I could go. And if it was a mental health issue, it was either CAMS or educational psychologist, and both of them took weeks to get involved with young people. And then when they did, it was one appointment every 6 weeks. So it was too little spread out over time. So one of the reasons that we are so keen to have counsellors available in all sorts of locations is to make sure that people are not in that position. I would echo a lot of what Alison said about actually tackling poverty, doubling child poverty payments, increasing carers allowance, keeping the increase in universal credit and so on. All of these things we're in favour of, but it's much more than that, because money is important, very important, but it's actually knowing where to go and making sure that when you do reach out for help, you get it, and you get sent to the right place if it wasn't the right place in the first place.
Thank you, Carol. And I'm now going to move on to Claire Adamson from the SNP. Thanks, Claire.
So, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here this afternoon, and I'm sorry I missed the first event with the young people, but I know my colleague Marie Todd was there for that one. In the last term of the Parliament, I was convener of the Education and Skills Committee, and we could see at first hand the challenges facing young people through, particularly in the area of education, through the work of our committee, although we did have a remit for child's wellbeing as well. So while there had been some progress made in this, including the right to access for a counsellor to all children within the schools, and our committee had hoped to do some additional work on that, COVID happened, and we know that the societal inequalities that were there around poverty, around those who had experienced childhood disease, those who were in need of extra support, those have all been exacerbated by COVID, and we have a massive task ahead of us in trying to tackle some of the support issues that families need. So I don't want to take up too much time, as I know there are many people who will want to tell us their view on it, and that's why we're here to listen today. But if I just talk about some of the things that the Scottish Government's guaranteeing to do in this manifesto. So we're going to work towards a minimum income guarantee. So we haven't committed to roll that out, but we're funding pilots for that and moving towards a minimum income guarantee that would ensure that citizens had a reasonable amount of money to live on with dignity in the communities, and that would go some way to alleviating poverty. We are providing a cash grant of £520 per year for every family with children in receipt of free school meals, and that will continue until the child payment is rolled out successfully and complete. And we're also guaranteeing as well that all primary school children will have access to breakfast and lunch throughout the year. As Alison has already laid out the reasons why that is so important for families. We're a new delivery plan to lift children out of poverty, backed by a £50 million fund to support that work. And we're introducing a care leaver grant to provide care experienced young people with additional support and security at the time of transition out of the care system. And of course, we have the care experience bursary as well that's available to those in higher and further education in our schools. We're also committed to the work from the promise, which was from care experienced young people coming to us with demands for what would make their lives better going forward, and we're looking to implement the promise going forward. Just a few other things, the commitment to mental health, again, it's been spoken around already how vitally important that is, and we will ensure that at least 1% of frontline NHS spending is dedicated to child and adolescent mental health services. We want safe places for young people to be able to socialise and to play, and we've committed to rolling out a refurbishment of play parks across all of Scotland, and that will of course include inclusive facilities for disabled children in our communities. We've got the Young Persons Guarantee going forward, and we're providing also financial support for young adults in recognition of what COVID, the impact for that has been in their lives. And we will be increasing the age at which young people can be eligible to council tax. So we're removing that. So from 18 to 22, a young person will be free from paying council tax. And we want to strengthen children's rights and representation. And part of that was the unanimous decision of the Parliament to introduce the United Nations Convention of the Rights Bill in the last few months of the Parliament, which is a huge step forward for the rights of young people in Scotland. And the work we're doing in Keeping the Promise is investing £10 million to establish a new care experience grant, and that will be a grant of £200 paid to support around 50,000 young care experience people between the age of 16 and 26. So like many people on the call and what's already been said, we understand the link between poverty and the challenges that families are facing, and we're doing as much as we can to support families going forward, and in innovative ways, things like stopping student loan payments for people in maternity leave, which will help families at hard-pressed times in their lives as well. So I'll leave it there, and I'm really looking forward to the contributions this afternoon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Claire. And last but not least, Paul O'Kane from the Labour Party. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Sally-Ann. Hi, great to see Paul and Donna, who are with us on the call, and everyone else who's watching. Delighted to be back with Aberlour. I was really honoured to do the young persons event and to hear some really interesting and constructive points from young people about how we can essentially listen better, I think, and work together to really deliver over certainly the next 5 years in the Parliament, but also beyond that, because I think with a lot of these issues, we know that they're not short-term fixes. You know, we need a dedicated long-term plan that looks at investing and thinking about what needs to be done, because you might invest money and time and energy now, but we might not see the benefits of that until much later on in the future, particularly for many of our young people who are very young at this stage. And I'm very much committed, and Scottish Labour's committed to that kind of early and preventative investment in young people. A wee bit about me, maybe start, and then I'll just share some of Scottish Labour's ideas. My name is Paul O'Kane. I'm our candidate in Renfrewshire South and in West Scotland. I'm also our spokesperson for further and higher education and science. I am a councillor in East Renfrewshire, and I've got the great privilege of being the education convener in that council. But also in my other life, in my day job, I work for a national learning disability charity, and have worked with parents and carers over many years around the whole agenda of rights and representation and service provision. So I know Aberlour well, and really nice to be sharing this platform today with others. So Scottish Labour essentially in our manifesto for this election is really focused on recovery, because we know that we've all lived through an unprecedented time, and a time that none of us could have imagined before the pandemic. We certainly at the heart of this is recovery and getting ourselves back on our feet, getting our young people back on their feet, and getting parents and carers back on their feet as we begin to move out of lockdown restrictions and indeed COVID. So we are really focused on what are the initial investments that need to happen to help people move beyond the pandemic, where we know that tens of thousands of people have sadly lost their lives and thousands of other people have lost their jobs and their livelihoods. So for us, that's about a recovery in different phases, education being a big one, looking at how do we support all young people in their return to education, looking at, for example, each young person having a bespoke comeback plan that looks at them as an individual and thinks about their needs, including, of course, mental health needs, because we know that mental health has been a huge issue throughout the pandemic, and of course before and beyond that, and will continue to be an issue. So we want to ensure that young people have their needs met by having a really holistic look at what those needs are. We want families also to have a sense that they have a stake in that plan, and that they have the supports that they need in terms of support at home and home learning. We've also spoken a lot about our kind of summer recovery, because I think the important thing is that young people and their families are able to access social activities during summer holidays, particularly this year, because they've missed out so much on socialising and being with others. So some of the kind of ideas that we've had are that families should have summer passes that can enable them to go for days out and to access culture and arts and sport, and make sure that they make the most of the summer holiday period together after a really difficult year. And we would like to take these sorts of ideas and mainstream those as well, so that all summer holiday periods can be used, and they're affordable for families. And for me, that buys into the wider point about the cost of school and the cost of school day. And I think we really need to take strong action to tackle that, because I know it can be really prohibitive for families with trips, after school clubs. We want to see access being for everyone. I think in terms of family incomes, we are looking again, similarly to other panelists and other parties, that guaranteed minimum income, I think, is really important, and we've pledged to work on that. We have also pledged to increase the Scottish Child payment to the £20 per week. We are looking at how can we give everyone a rebate on their water charges, because we know that Scottish Water, for example, have had a surplus this year, and we want to reinvest that out to families. And looking at things like finally changing the council tax system and replacing it with something fairer, so that people feel that there is both, more money in terms of the support they have, but also that we are properly investing in funding in our councils, because I think that's one of the big points. A lot of the stuff you've heard today and a lot of the stuff you will hear will be delivered by local councils. So we need to make sure that councils are appropriately and properly funded to provide the services that really matter to people and to move them forward. So those are just some of the comeback ideas that we have. As I said, we know that it's going to be a long-term strategy. I think it's going to take us a long time to go over the pandemic. What we can't do, though, is throw out all the good work that we were doing pre-pandemic on things like, the promise that has to be honoured and stuck to. And we need to continue to listen to families about what their experience has been and what their hopes are for the future. And I'm really hopeful that that's what I can do today. Take on board your points and certainly, hopefully, feedback in the conversation.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Thanks to all the candidates for their comments. I'm going to move on to introduce our parents and carers to contribute what they want to the conversation. Both Paul and Donna will have about 10 minutes to speak. You can use as much of that or as little of that as you want. It's entirely up to you. It would be useful if you could maybe just respond to some of the things that each of the politicians have said. What was it that they said that landed with you and gave you hope? Are there any bits that you think they've missed, they could have said more on? And most importantly of all, what are the things that you've been working on over the last few days about the things that are really important to you? I'm going to start with Donna. I'm going to give you the floor, Donna, and invite you to talk about the things that really matter to you and to your family. So thank you, Donna. Sorry, you're on mute.
I was on mute, aye.
I was telling you you were on mute and I was on mute too.
Okay, my name's Donna, and at the minute I'm actually caring for my niece who was previously in a home. And over recent events we've realised that there really isn't anywhere to take my niece to between the age of 16 and 18, so there's nothing out there at all for our mental state of mind, which means waiting on waiting lists for the likes of CAMS, and these waiting lists are quite long. And I just feel that in this day and age, there should be something much more for that age group. My brother was also in a home, so with having two members of family previously being in homes, I think that if there was counselling for them whilst they were in the home, they might be a bit more ready to be able to move on and live in their own places. Because at the minute, my niece is nowhere near ready for living in her own place. And there's lots of people in this situation that we're in. It's really sad to actually think that, like I've already said, you would like in this day and age, it's something more be looked at for people in care homes. Like the age that they're leaving at 16 seems to me a bit too young to be leaving. So could look at extending the ages to maybe 18 and 21, depending on the personal circumstances. And kind of getting stuck now. They're going to start going over the same thing over again. So I'd like to know that something can be done to help people in these situations.
That's really helpful, Donna. What I would like to do is just ask some of the politicians to respond to you. You know, 2021 in Scotland, we've got a situation where Donna's experiencing here for some of her family members, people still moving out at 16, regardless of the promises that have been made about that not happening and law being changed to make sure it doesn't happen. So what are you actually going to do about that if you get into power or back into power? I'm going to start with Claire Adamson.
Thanks, Sally-Ann. Yeah, thank you, Donna, for sharing that experience with us. So I was involved in the Children and Young People's Bill in the Education Committee in the previous session of the Parliament, where we heard very clearly the need for support past the age of 16, and so we extended that at that time with that bill to be available to young people up to the age of 25. So the local authorities have a duty of care for people still, and I know the implementation of that sometimes is not as good as it could be. So what we have to do is ensure that best practice across the country is there. That's why we're investing in the transitions grant as well, because we realise that this is a difficult part of a young person's life as they move from one place to the other. We're looking at our justice system as well, and we have a fund to end homelessness as well, because we know very often care experienced young people end up homeless as well. So there's further work to be done on that. And if I can just talk about the mental health aspect of this, I think this is so important. When we, in the last time of the Parliament, the Education and Skills Committee did an important piece of work on the cost of music tuition. That's been mentioned by Paul already today about the cost of the school day. So the SNP is increasing the clothing grant in the manifesto, but it's also made a commitment to stop charging in schools for music tuition for subjects like technology or home economics, where there's sometimes a charge for participation in the class. So we're committed to absolutely making those opportunities free, and that's really important, especially because what we saw from the work the committee did, that the music part of it and the playing in the school orchestra or being involved in those areas wasn't just about excellence in music. It was about the skills people learned. It was the commitment to their colleagues. It was about having an area, a place, a hobby to go to stress relief, and really and friendship groups and building capacity in young people. And so all this is really important, and every young person should have the opportunity to take part in clubs like that, and also have the opportunity to go on school trips, which we're doing as well. And I just want to talk about one charity in my area, Real Time Music. Real Time Music started about 23 years ago. They've been working in the area of North Lanarkshire. They're not in my constituency at the moment. They're based in Ewart Hill, and they work with young people who are disengaging from school for whatever reasons. And it's not just about music, it's about creative industries, it's about technology. They're actually just becoming an accredited SQA organisation, so they can actually take young people through SQA qualifications out with the school environment. Fantastic charity helping people. The Scottish Government Regeneration Fund's just given them £1.1 million to build a bespoke studio in Motherwell in my constituency, and that will have a performance space in it, and that's because there is a recognition that young people under the age of 18 but above the age of maybe going to the Scouts or club or whatever, had very few places where they could actually go and listen to music, because pubs didn't want them because they weren't making money from the alcohol consumption, and really there was a lot of mistrust of them for community organisations or hiding halls and all these kind of things. So this is recognised. This is a charity that has recognised the very challenges you're talking about, and they now have a funding it. So I would be asking, I don't know what part of the country you're in, but there is such good work going on out there, and it's those kind of examples of really listening to young people, what they want, what they need, and investing in those areas that we need to take forward.
Okay, thanks, Claire. I'm going to move on to Carol, then Paul, then Alison. Obviously, one of the things that Donna did raise specifically was waiting times and accessing statutory services that should be more accessible than they are. So it would be useful if some of the politicians could also address that. Carol, can you go first?
Yeah.
Or after Claire, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Certainly, that, as I mentioned in my opening 2 minutes, we actually think this is a critical area. It's actually critical across the population, but very much so for young people and adolescents. And as I said, we think that what we need are far more mental health counsellors, and we need them readily available in all sorts of places. Now, in order to do that, we just need to train more people. And we are committed to doubling the number of counsellors at least, and also to pay £5,000 training grant to suitably qualified adults to maybe change career and become mental health counsellors, because we need far more of them. We actually need more psychologists and psychiatrists. They take a very long time to train. And for the majority of people suffering mental health illnesses, they don't actually need perhaps input at that level. But what they do need is input at a lower level that can actually stop them deteriorating to the point where they need a psychologist or a psychiatrist. So we are totally committed to getting more mental health counsellors out there. And so to cut these waiting times, you don't have to wait, but also so that children and young people can build up a personal relationship with that counsellor, and that there's continuity, because that's a key thing. Now, as I said, I've had a lot of experience of young people being referred to services and having to wait a long time, but also perhaps being referred to an educational psychologist. And I'm prepared to say there's a wide variation in not the quality of educational psychologists, but how effective they are working with different age groups. You need people who actually relate to young people, because that personal relationship can have a huge impact on somebody. And that's what we need to make sure, that when we bring in counsellors and psychologists for young people specifically, they're people who actually really relate to them. I think also the schools need to be more, the actual what's going on in school needs to be more linked to children's actual well-being. We are suggesting that schools should have far more activities at lunchtimes and after school, bringing in all sorts of organisations that can contribute, because we know that children who take part in activities have a better mental health and a better sense of their own well-being. But that isn't standard across our schools, and we need to bring that in so that everybody goes to school. It's not only for their academic learning, but it's actually so that they can do fun things at lunchtime, fun things after school, and we would make it an entitlement that they can go on some kind of residential experience. I've taken children all over this country and abroad on residential experiences, and it can actually totally turn a child's attitude around to be taken out of their own circumstances and see something completely different. And it opens up their minds, it changes their motivation and their attitude, and that's exactly what we need to do if we want these children to have the best start in life. That's what we are committed to.
Okay, thank you, Carol. I'm sure when Paul comes in, Paul Gallagher, we will return to some of the themes around early help and making sure we get to families quickly enough. But for now, I'm going to go straight on to Paul O'Kane and then Alison Johnson after that. Paul.
And thank you for the question, Donna. I thought it's a really important question, and I'll try to take the two parts, because I think you spoke about people who are essentially in your family that are in the system, if you like, who are experiencing a service or who have a gap now in service because they've essentially reached an age. There's been a lot of commitments made, a lot of promises made, but the action needs to follow, and we need to see that if we are really serious about supporting people through a transition in their life, and whatever that transition may be, that we actually have the investment, the money behind it, and the resource and the support behind it, so that it happens, and it happens in a way that's tailored to them and gives them the right support. And I think Scottish Labour, what we've said in terms of mental health supports, is that there needs to be a no wrong door approach to a lot of this. So you need to know that wherever you go, someone is going to be able to help kind of triage what the problem is, what the issue is, and then help you to get the right support and signpost you on if that's required. So whether that's at the early stages, the health visitor, or whether it's the GP, or whether it's a teacher in school, it's about people having a knowledge and an experience and being trained to triage and then to signpost to make sure that you're not having to go through multiple doors, you're not having to tell the story tens of times. You're actually just getting the support that you need in the right place. And for me, there's something about that transitions element needing to be strong. People need to have a really well thought out transition plan, and that needs to be well supported. And it shouldn't be the case that anyone at 16 is being allocated, for example, a housing tenancy on their own and not getting the right support. We've all made commitments around that. So the reality is that it goes back to a wee bit of what I said in my opening remarks about making sure that we're funding services properly so they can do the work that needs done. And whether that's local councils being able to support people into tenancies and be able to support people in communities, or whether it's third sector providers like Aberlour and others having the investment that they need to work in partnership with local authorities to deliver a lot of these services. And we need to make sure that that money's there as well. And I think that wider point just about waiting lists, Donna, you're absolutely right. People are waiting too long to see mental health specialists. We need more staff, and we do need more counsellors. We need more access to that in different settings. And I mean, we've all agreed that this is a huge issue. It was a pandemic before we knew about COVID, so we need to make sure that we're using all of the resource we can, get those waiting lists down, but also to make sure that wherever someone goes and says, having a bit of a crisis here, they're not getting turned away or having to go and make an appointment that's in 8 weeks' time potentially, because we know that some people end up waiting 8 or 16 weeks. They need to be saying, right, okay, let's triage the problem now. And then signpost you in the right direction and stick with you and your family on the journey until you get where you need to be.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And finally, Alison Johnston.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think, this is why this is so invaluable. Your experience of looking after your niece and just your feeling that the services that she needs aren't there for her. I mean, I think when it comes down to CAMHS, as someone who's been party spokesperson on health and sport, children and young people and social security, there's an ongoing issue there, isn't there? When you constantly have a problem with waiting lists, and we've debated them through the 5 years of this parliamentary term and indeed the term before that, then you know that you don't have enough staff in place and you don't have the resources or the capacity to meet the demand. So we've got to address that with a meaningful long-term workforce plan so that in 5 years' time, we're still not discussing this. Wouldn't it be fabulous if this was the parliamentary session where we got to grips with the CAMHS waiting list? And I think we have to, because as we come out of the pandemic, we are speaking here about, an ever-increasing mental health crisis. It's impacted so many young people. Our students who've been learning on Zoom for months, young folk who've been isolated from their friends, they've not been able to take part in the music and sports and the things that maybe let them let off steam and relax and just sort of deal with stress. So long-term workforce planning there, and an absolute commitment to get those waiting lists into shape. They've got to be fit for purpose, because even at the moment, I mean, 18 weeks when you're suffering from a mental health problem, in my view, is far too long. There are very few other illnesses where you'd be asked to sit back and wait for that length of time. I think what's really, before I came into Parliament, I was a City of Edinburgh councillor and I was a member of the corporate parenting group. And one thing that will stay with me forever was watching a film made by 4 young care leavers about their experiences of their transition from care into what you were just saying there, a single person tenancy. And what really struck me, I mean, the video was so well made, and it was humorous and it was heartbreaking in equal measure. And they were saying, how they hated the resident. Well, one of them, I just hate this residential unit and I really cannot wait to get out of here and be on my own and make my own decisions and, just do my own thing. And then the reality, you saw them being given their keys and going off into flats by themselves. And, I think one of the young care leavers, he was, fairly seriously dyslexic, and he had a problem with his boiler and he couldn't understand, he just couldn't read the instructions. It was absolutely way too much. And just at the end of it, there was a complete about turn and a realization that this was incredibly difficult and that actually they did need some support. And to me, that just sort of spoke to the discussion that's still ongoing about making sure it's the right thing for that person. A permanent single person tenancy might be ideal for somebody at 17, but it might be completely disastrous for someone else. So I think we just need to make sure, whether it's looking after our young people's mental health or at any transition, that it's properly supported. So that's down to local authorities and national government as well, looking at the kind of housing that we're building. Do we have enough spaces where young people could be living with some adult support while they need it? You know, do we have enough supported lodgings? Do we have enough independent tenancies? Do we have enough people working with those young people and those who've been involved in their development every step of the way to ensure that there's still space for that interaction? And yeah, just to make sure we're doing absolutely the best thing for them. But I mean, I think the mental health issue is just so, it's just been a clear theme running through this whole election campaign. I think when I've spoken a debate from poverty to health to childcare, it is there. We absolutely have to get it right. We've got manifesto commitments for 15-minute GP appointments, so you've got more time to speak with your GP, your local surgery. We want a mental health clinician in every GP surgery. We want counsellors in our schools. You know, others have said it. We've got to get away from this wrong door approach, because we know too at CAMHS many people have waited for a long time to get that appointment, and they get there and then they're told, actually, this is the wrong place for you. There've been too many rejected referrals, and that can be quite confusing, demoralizing, and actually devastating for some young people. So we've got a big task here ahead of us as a society in Scotland if we want to make sure that our young people that their mental health is good, and that we're really focusing on well-being as we come out of this traumatic year plus.
Okay, thanks, Alison. Donna, is there anything you would like to come back to any of the politicians on? I was struck by what you were saying about your family members, and we've heard a couple of people mention early help, and it seems to me, and certainly as a parent to Aberlour and many other organisations in the third sector, that actually part of what we're missing here is prevention. How do we stop children's mental health deteriorating? How do we stop CAMHS being the only option at times for schools because there's nothing else in their local community? And one of the things we've argued for is a comprehensive approach to supporting families early, before and outside of universal like education and health, somewhere that families can go in the community. Would any of that help your family, do you think, if you look back at what happened, if there was help there earlier? Would that have made a difference?
It would have if there was help there earlier, but it's now got to a stage where that kind of thing really wouldn't help us. But I just feel like every kid that goes into the care system hasn't went there for a nice reason. So surely something could be changed where they do have to have counselling, because right now it's a choice and they're all going to say no. But if you could get their help there, their mental state of mind could be fixed before they're leaving that care home. So I just, in my personal belief, and obviously if I've had a brother that was in care and a niece that was in care, I've seen a lot of kids coming in and out, and it's not just here in Murray. It's like all over Scotland that this kind of thing's letting young folk do, and they can't cope with adult life if they haven't got the tools and they're not in the right mindset to do so. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, Donna. Really helpful. Is there anything else you want to say before I move on to Paul, the very patient Paul, shall I say?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Donna. That was really helpful. Great questions. I'm going to introduce Paul, who's a dad that Aberlour has been supporting for a wee while. Paul, you've got the opportunity to say the things that are important to you, and also just ask the politicians a question or questions that are important to you as well. So handing over to you now, Paul.
Okay. Hi guys, right. You touched on a number of subjects, right, that I could actually talk all day about, you know, to tell you the truth. And I mean, the CAMHS all the way through, I've dealt with CAMHS, etc. I mean, over the past few years, and there is big improvements being done through the full system, kind of thing, right? But I'm going to speak about poverty, child poverty, and school poverty today. You know, kind of thing. I'm a single dad on the benefits. I get standard benefits just for myself and my young daughter, who's 5, starts primary 1 this year, kind of thing. I struggle day to day, month to month, basically to cover my fuel costs, to put food on the table, to put clothes on my daughter's back. Understand, I mean, that the Scottish Government's got the Best Start programme going, the extra payment, child payment, which is a great help, kind of thing. But we are still struggling to cover cost, like the cost of fuel. My cost of running my electricity during the winter months for October all the way through to February, March could be £200 to £300 a month. Now, that's over half of my benefits I get, kind of thing. You know, my food shop, £200, and that's not including fresh stuff that I need to make my daughter's health that have a decent health kind of thing, you know what I mean? So what can you get? I mean, watching question time on Thursday night, it was mentioned that it's £4.8 billion of allocated funds in the Scottish Government. What can you guys do to help families like myself to get out of the situation that we're in over the winter months when you have Christmas to think about? And again, all these extra costs that come through at that time of year kind of thing. You're on mute.
Sorry, thanks for that. Thanks for that, Paul. Really good question, and thanks for sharing some personal information there. What I would say is that, you know, there are many parents in the same situation as Paul. Paul is speaking on behalf of a number of different parents in Aberlour who have similar experiences. I'm going to go to Paul Kane first this time, followed by Claire Adamson, then Carol, and then Alison. So Paul, could you respond to Paul first? Thanks.
I think Sally Ann called you the patient, Paul. Maybe I'm the impatient, Paul. I don't know. But I say, Paul, I'm impatient to change some of this stuff because thank you for sharing your experience and your story, because it's compelling, and it's, you know, it's about your everyday life and what you're experiencing on the ground, so to speak. But you know, I think fuel poverty is a huge challenge. And we do need to do a lot more to tackle it, not just, I think, around the cost of energy bills, but actually helping people to drive those bills down by getting their house more efficient and kind of less drafty, less cold. And Scottish Labour's kind of said what we need to do is we need to have a big kind of investment from the government about looking at how do we make houses more efficient and how do we give grants to you know, families like your own, so that you can get the insulation you need, so you can you know, get a boiler upgrade if you need that, so you can look at the actual heating system that's in your house, so that it's more efficient, more cost effective, and it doesn't cost as much to run. And also that obviously contributes to the wider point about the environment and making things better for the environment. I think the points you make, Paul, about using the social security system in Scotland to work for families is key. You know, we've spoken about the Scottish Child Payment needing to be increased. I think there's a consensus across everyone here around that, and around making sure that that's a payment that we're all invested in, and that continues to rise as cost of living rises. I think also there's some really practical measures for families that have young people at school, and we do need to look at cost of the school day and what does that entail. And I said that in my opening remarks, and thinking about, you know, the cost of extracurricular activities, making them free, making sure that there is access to school meals all year round, including in the holiday period as well. I know that's been a big challenge for a lot of families that I talk to in my part of the world. So there's a range of measures I think we can take there, but I think if we can do something that's really sustainable and that allows you to make changes wherever you're living, I think that can have a direct impact on the costs of energy and the costs of heating your home, and I suppose during the winter months of kind of making sure that you can cover all your costs, because as you say, Paul, it is a really demanding time for families as well. And I think that's one of the other things that I'm really passionate about is just making sure people have got the right access to information and advice and support on their finances, and on, you know, too many of these support services unfortunately have been cut because of cuts to local authorities. So I think we do need to see better investment in citizens' advice and money advice and rights, and also in things like credit unions. I'm a cooperative candidate as well, so I'm really passionate about the credit union movement and about how we can help people to get access to loans that are obviously sustainable to pay back and aren't charging extortionate amounts of interest, and also get the really good high quality money advice. So you know, really absolutely listening to what you say, and I think we've got some practical ideas there, but keen to hear if you've got anything further as well.
Okay, thanks. We've probably just got just over 10 minutes left, so if I can just ask the candidates to try and be as brief as possible. I think I said I'd go to Claire Adamson next, did I?
I think you did. Yeah. Thank you, and
thank you. About my screen.
Thank you, Paul, for your points. It's really important, and fuel poverty will be a common problem that comes through our surgery doors for people every year. There are some of the providers who do support families in need, and there are grants available, and they can look at helping out families in specific need. And if come next year, if you're finding yourself in that situation, I would urge you to contact your local councillors or your MSP to ask about what's available from the providers themselves to help. There's also the home heat agenda, which looks at the efficiency of your home. And this comes back to when we're talking about recovery. We want to build an economy that's based on green jobs, and we want to build an economy that's based on us meeting our carbon targets, our zero emission targets. And that means getting our properties and getting our homes insulated properly and ensuring that they're fuel efficient. And the government's committed to pay for work in that area as well. So it's all about that whole circular economy part of it, and looking at the bigger picture and where we're investing money, because at the end of the day, this is all for your well-being and your family's well-being as an individual, but it also helps the sort of big picture big ticket items of the government in terms of carbon emissions. So it's about ensuring that those things happen as we're going forward. And you mentioned the work that's been done in terms of the grant and the school grants and the free school meals part of it. Can I just say a wee bit about I think it's really important that these are universal benefits that are being offered. So my own, don't get me wrong, every kid that's fed and who's in crisis is something that has to be done. But the model that North Lanarkshire had adopted for it was a 365 club, but it was advertised as being for people in free school meals. And what that meant was it split friendship groups and stigmatised the young people that were coming along. But the fact that we're doing this all as universal benefits, I think is going to be really good going forward, because there shouldn't be any stigma associated with someone who's in need, and it'll make it much easier, I think, for young people to engage in what's been offered out there. The fact that it is a universal service. I'll leave it there. Thanks, Sally.
Thanks, Claire. I'll move on to Carol Ford now, and then Alison.
To be honest, I don't have a huge amount to add to what Paul and Claire have said, because I think all the parties have signed up to many of the policies about increasing payments, child poverty and universal credit uplift and so on. I mean, Scotland has the powers to make new benefits available if they wish to do so. But what intrigues me about it is that it would appear in Scotland that being in poverty has more of an impact on your life than in other parts of the United Kingdom. That's what the OECD found in 2015. And that's, I think, something we need to explore further. Why is that the case? I mean, part of it will be to do with the climate. It's actually colder, and your fuel costs are higher. And certainly the Liberal Democrats, our target is to replace gas boilers with heat pumps, which are far cheaper, more expensive to put in, far cheaper to run, and we would be targeting houses in more deprived areas first for that. But because of climate change targets, that's definitely the way to go to get rid of gas boilers. So that's one of the specific things of fuel poverty. But we are in agreement generally with the uplift in the various benefits. But I do think we need to do more research into why is poverty having a bigger impact on people. It has a bigger impact on their health. Our health statistics are worse, and our statistics on children, how well they do in school and how many of them attend university coming from disadvantaged homes, are actually worse than around the rest of the UK. And I think that is something we should be looking at, because if there are things we can do to rectify that, then we ought to be doing them. And I don't think we know enough about the why.
Okay. Thank you, Carol. Alison?
Yeah, thanks very much, Paul. I think what struck me was your energy bills. I mean, they are significant. I'm going to be right up front here and say that they're double mine, at least. And I do wonder sometimes what climate we think we're building houses for in this country, because so many of them are clearly not up to the task. And I also know with my work, in the past with the cross-party group on construction, not only are they not well insulated, but they believe that 50% of houses aren't even wind and watertight. So you've got draft, you've got damp, you've got all sorts of problems before you even start looking at doing things that I'd like to see, and that's making, access to micro renewables, or maybe a wee solar panel that might cover the cost of your shower or something. So there's a heck of a lot of work to do here. But what I would say, fuel poverty, food poverty, period poverty. This morning I was involved in a discussion about sports and the fact that a lot of young people on low incomes never take part in the way that their more affluent friends do. This all boils down to not having enough money at the end of the day. These are all different types of poverty. I would say there's a specific reason for Scotland finding itself with such dire fuel poverty stats, and that's the fact that we have colder weather than most of the rest of the United Kingdom, and we've got a lot of houses that are off-grid that have got particular challenges there. But there are things we could do about it. I mean, I think most parties in this election have been talking about a universal basic income. That's access to non-conditional income, where you're not meant to, you don't have to jump through all the hellish hoops of the benefits system, where you have to fill in forms that are so complicated that they bring a tear to your eye. I mean, I'd like to see us do things like, if you fill in one form for one benefit, there's a sort of system there that looks at all your information and says, oh, do you know what? Paul is also entitled to X, Y, and Z, because we know there's billions of pounds of benefits that aren't taken up. So we can do something about that. We've got a manifesto commitment to sort of statutory take-up targets to make sure that's as good as it could be. I mean, obviously a universal basic income would take that away in the same way that the child benefit did. There was no stigma around child benefit, and it made a tremendous difference. So I think because we seem to be stymied at the moment by the Westminster government, we're at a stage where the Scottish government wants to see pilots on a universal basic income go ahead, but the DWP and HMRC are making it difficult for us to get access to the data we need to carry out those pilots and try it out. But what we could do in the meantime is look at something called a minimum income standard. Like, we need to look at a level of like your income and say, is it possible for Paul and his young daughter to live a full life on the amount of money he has every month? And if it's not, then we as a society have got to do something about that. Because it's not just, this morning, as I was saying, involved in the sport discussion. Okay, my own party has a commitment to make that access to sport free for young people. And Claire was talking about music, and these are all parts of rounded education and things that help you develop. But you're still not wanting to go along to that sports class or, take up football if you think, oh, I've not got the right boots or I haven't got the right gear. So we have to get really serious about what we think is a livable income. If your income doesn't allow you and your daughter to take part comfortably, to join in with things that most of your friends are, then that simply isn't good enough. So I hope as this session of the Parliament goes forward, because I've seen this commitment in several manifestos, we'll have more of a discussion about how much we expect people to live on. But yeah, with regards to fuel poverty, I mean, we need to be making our houses fit for purpose, and too many of them aren't. I mean, I suppose I'll just finish up here, but for the first time in my life, I live in a more modern building. Like, it's 20 years old. Up until this point in my life, I have always lived in older properties. And I couldn't, 5 years ago when I moved in here, it was April, I could not believe how warm it was. We were walking around saying, oh, this is too much. I have adjusted, but it just really drove home to me. And my energy bills have plummeted since doing so. But it just tells me the difference that proper insulation makes. And we could be creating, hundreds of thousands of jobs, retrofitting all our not fit for purpose housing stock in Scotland. I'll stop there, but great questions, Paul. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alison. Paul, now I'm conscious that Donna needs to go by 3:05. That's an absolute deadline for Donna. So she may, if we run over a wee bit, we're going to have to say cheerio to Donna before she goes and thank her very much for her contribution, which has been invaluable. But I do want to give Paul the opportunity to come back and ask the politicians any questions that might have arisen for him from your contributions, and before doing a quick roundup. So Paul, do you have anything you want to come back on?
Right, first of all, I'm social housing, I'm council housing, basically. So any benefits that's out there for like graphic squares, etc. I don't qualify for that because I'm in a social housing kind of thing though. My council are talking about upgrading my heating system because my heating system's antiquated, and I have a meter that's not updated either. You know, but they kind of change that. It's down to Scottish Power, and Scottish Power are no playing ball just now. You know what I mean, kind of thing. But it's social housing. That's why my cost is so dear, kind of thing, and the fact I stay here, right? But the thing about it, it says you have to school meals during holidays, right? Okay. My wee girl, as I say, is at nursery. Okay. Through the COVID period, grants were administered by the Scottish Government to cover cost of meals during the COVID period. It was only from primary 1 to primary 3. You know what I mean? Kind of thing. So as a parent kind of thing who had a kid in nursery who was getting a free school meal kind of thing, shouldn't the kids in nursery, shouldn't all kids basically in school get that same payment kind of thing? Rather than just kids who primary 1 to primary 3 who get free school meals.
Okay, Paul, I'm going to leave the politicians to address that in their closing remarks, because I'm actually going to ask them to address a couple of things really quickly before we go. So that can be one of them. What about kids in nursery? What are their entitlements? What are you going to do about that? I'm going to ask each of the candidates to answer a direct question. We appreciate that each of the parties has made a commitment to doubling the Scottish Child Payment. When are you going to do it? Because IPPR and the Joseph Rowntree Foundation has pointed out that if you don't do it by 2022, we're not going to meet our interim targets for child poverty. So are you going to do it before 2022? We can't wait till the end of the Parliament. That's something that I want each of the candidates to tell us their position on. And also just a statement around costs. There's been lots of research done into being poor. And one of the things that people in that research highlight time and time again is the premium, the poverty premium of being poor, how much more it costs families living in poverty for things that you and I would take for granted. Credit if you need a new washing machine, power if you need to keep your power supply on. Still, families are having to pay over the odds in terms of tariffs. What, if any, do your parties intend to do about that poverty premium and helping lift families out of poverty? Somebody said earlier on the important bit about you, Alison, that compartmentalisation of poverty, period poverty, food poverty, fuel poverty. Poverty is poverty. It means you've not got enough money to do what you need to do. What are your parties going to do about stop compartmentalising poverty and getting money back directly into people's pockets, as Paul has suggested and other folk on the event about suggested? And a final bit for me is, what is your takeaway from today? What are you going to take away from the conversation today that you didn't have on your radar before, about how you, within Parliament, if you're all lucky enough to be elected, might conduct yourself in respect to families in Scotland and how we might support them differently and better? So I'm going to ask each of the candidates to. Now, I'm just conscious, Donna, it's 4 minutes past 3. I know you're going to leave us. So before you go, I want to take this opportunity just to say thank you so much for contributing and giving us your time. We really, really appreciate that. And I don't want to hold you back. So you go and do what you need to do. Don't be late. Okay, thank you, Donna. And I'll hand over to the politicians. I'll start with Claire Adamson, then we'll have Alison Johnson, then Paul, and then Carol Ford. Okay, thanks, Claire.
Thank you, and I hope I remembered all the points I'm supposed to cover when I'm speaking back to you. So
I'll remind you if you don't, Claire.
So Paul had specifically asked about the offer for nursery at the moment. So so the Scottish Government are committed already to the free 11-40 hours of childcare, and that's extended to vulnerable 2-year-olds. We're going to extend that to 1-year-olds as well now. So there's an earlier point at which families can engage with that nursery provision at the moment, and we'll continue to do the free school meals for the meal provision for families that would qualify for free school meals within that. And we're also introducing a wraparound service, which will be an affordable childcare, and it will be free to the most vulnerable people as well. So that's to ensure that working families can make the best use of the free 1140 hours, but also are able to use that working around their schedules, which is really important. And if I just go back to the specific question from Sally-Ann about the 2022. So the Scottish Government have obviously they're implementing this at the moment in Social Security, and they say it will take to the end of 2022 to get the systems fully up and running. However, we are bridging that system, and we've set up an interim to pay £520 to qualifying families this year and next year. And this will help lift more families out of poverty. So it would be the full £20 per week, which we will implement by the end of 2022. We will be given that interim payment as a way of helping in the interim period while that is being set up. So I hope both of those will do this, and we definitely want to see people having autonomy for how the benefits work for them and their own money in this situation. So part of the remit of Social Security when we set it up for Social Security Scotland was that we would have dignity and respect for families and people who are engaging in that process, and that will continue, and that is also about getting money back into people's pockets and ensuring people are supported. And in terms of conducting ourselves, this is really hard because we're very self-congratulated as politicians and feel that we understand an issue and we're doing the most and that we are doing what we can to help it. But it is very humbling sometimes to hear the first time and the real time lived experience of people, because it reminds us just how important this is. So there's some areas that perhaps I need to do more on. Years and years ago, I think the 1990s, I was the first person to take a proposal for whole tenancy agreements that included fuel. Which they have in some of the Scandinavian countries, which means that it's to the benefit of the landlords and the social housing operators to have fuel efficient houses, because they have to provide the fuel and the heating as part of the rent. And I think some of these sort of very small tweaks to what we do could help and really improve outcomes for people. And also we do hear a lot about mental health and the issues around CAMHS and things. And Alison, I think, had mentioned right at the very end of what she was saying about the waiting lists and CAMHS is one thing, but really what the big problem for me is people that are bounced back. So they wait ages for the CAMHS appointment and they don't have something. And then they get to CAMHS and they say it's not the appropriate service for them, and they've been in that limbo for it. So it's about engaging the third sector organisations, peer support organisations. I've got a fantastic charity called Landed in my area that I work closely with, and it's peer-to-peer support around areas of addiction and self-harm and mental health for young people. And it's about remembering that there's the other options that are out there and ensuring that people are pointed appropriately to where they're going. So, and thank you again to Paul for the contribution, and it really makes such a difference to hear from Paul and Donna on these issues, and thanks.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Sorry, oh no, I'm not muted. Thanks, Claire. I think I said Alison next, did I?
Yeah, thank you.
Didn't write it down. Thanks, Alison.
Yeah, my takeaway from this, it's actually the same as my takeaway from your earlier event. It's just to make more time to take part in discussions like this, because we learn so much when we've got the opportunity to hear directly from parents and children. We'll learn more than we will in any briefing from any organisation, with the greatest of respect to everyone who's working out there. So I think more of these events would be really helpful. You were speaking about the poverty premium. I hosted an event in this session of Parliament with Professor Morag Traynor, and I am not joking you, one of the things that I then mentioned in a debate in Parliament was the fact her research shows that families living in poverty are paying 10 times as much for a washing machine as you or I would, because they cannot lay their hands on £250. Now, she has actually got, it's on the Parenting Across Scotland website, she's got this marked out very well, why it happens, because you end up being involved in the most ridiculous credit agreements with all sorts of insurances and so on forced upon you, and you can't get out of them. Can you imagine honestly paying like £1,400 for a, I mean, it beggars belief. So that's discriminatory, and I think it's an absolute affront to human rights that people with the lower incomes should be expected to carry that kind of burden. You've got a low income and then you've got this debt forever. It just goes on and on and on. You might be paying a small amount back, but it might be a small amount to someone on a decent income, but you're doing that for months, and it has an impact on your income for a very long time. So we need to do something about that. And as you say, it's you can get access to a direct debit, pay both your gas and electricity, cut this amount off the cost that isn't possible for a lot of people on lowest income. So we really need to be having a chat to our suppliers there, and it just has to be a fair system. Nobody's paying any more than anyone else because of the size of their bank account. I mean, that's just morally wrong. I really do think what we have to get to here is a situation where we agree that X is the minimum income that this family needs to live on, and that we don't expect anyone else to live on that. And whether that's through our discussions on a universal basic income, where it's or about the fast introduction of a minimum income standard, either way, let's start to move towards that. And as for the Scottish Child Payment, we need that yesterday. So I'm wholly supportive of that being introduced as quickly as possible, because I took part in a poverty hustings last week, where the stats, made it abundantly clear that young and old alike, numbers in poverty are increasing. We're heading towards 240,000 children in Scotland living in poverty, and we're going to miss I'm delighted that Scotland has child poverty targets. I mean, England doesn't, but we really want to do all that we can to commit to meet them, to make them meaningful. Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. And Paul, thank you.
Thanks very much. And thanks, Paul, for the follow-up question. I think in terms of kind of free school meals, there is, in our manifesto, we talk about that universal provision, primary 1 to 7. I think there's a degree of consensus about that. And I think that's going to be the conversation that we have in the next Parliament. I think also in terms of in the early years and nursery and early learning and childcare, we want to see the 1140 hours entitlement increase year on year to a point where we get to a place where 50 hours a week for families is what you get in terms of free early learning and childcare. And what should come with that is a holistic day at a centre, so that you're getting your lunch if that's required and all that sort of stuff as well. I think the wider point then that Sally Ann, you took us on to about poverty and poverty premium. I think I referred in some of my comments to the need for better sources of credit and support, so strengthening credit unions and community, money advice and CAB. You see the work that's done by organisations like that in communities, and it's huge. Unfortunately, many of these organisations are suffering funding cuts, so we need to have a really serious conversation about how they're funded and supported. There's also something for me in that point that's made about, trying not to compartmentalise poverty and looking at communities. North Ayrshire Council, led by Labour, has done a lot of work on community wealth building, and how do we ensure that communities take that kind of broad approach to getting more money into the local economy, getting more jobs in the local economy, but ensuring that folk are spending money, whether that's money they get through the social security system or through work in their local community, and there's access in their local community to shops that sell things that you need, but they sell them at fair prices, that you're putting, as I say, the money back into that economy, and you get that circular thing going on. So we want to see more of that across Scotland, more of those kind of cooperative models as well. And I think the other point that you had made, Sian, was just about that commitment around the Scottish Child Payment. In our manifesto, we've said we want to see that happen by the end of 2022. I take the point, though, that we need to really press on that, notwithstanding the technical arrangements and things. So certainly you've got a commitment from me to raise that in the first part of the Parliament, absolutely. I think that was, I don't know, did I miss anything?
Just your takeaway.
Oh, sorry, my takeaway, maybe the most important thing. Do you know, I said this at young person's events. For me, it's about ensuring that I take the voices of parents Parliament, but also that I come back and we've talked a lot today, and we have across period about the promise and about commitments that have been made. But, you know, actually what we need to do is, if we're talking about co-designing things with young people and with their families, that can't just be lip service. That actually needs to be genuine. And it means that politicians like us need to get out of our comfort zone sometimes and come and have a conversation. And hopefully we'll be able to do that face to face, and that'll be a cup of tea, hopefully, and a good chat. And then, you know, take things away and put them into action. So that's my commitment, and my takeaway from today is taking those voices forward.
Okay, thanks, Paul. And finally, last but not least, Carol, can you share your views? Thanks.
Yeah, well, quickly, Scottish Child Payment should be paid as soon as it possibly can. I fail to see that it would take till the end of 2022 to do something like that. We've got a vaccine, we've got 15 vaccines in less than a year. I just don't see how it can take that long. So we're committed to it being done.
Carol, you're fading away. Sorry, I can't hear you properly.
Right. I don't know.
That's better.
Oh, I'll sit forward. I think I'm getting occasionally my internet connection is low. So basically what I'm saying is the child payment should go quickly, and it shouldn't be so difficult as it's being made out. Secondly, I think that our party has come to the conclusion that a UBI is the only way forward to solve a lot of these problems. And I think, though, part of the problem with the UBI has been that it's not necessarily that popular with the whole population. I think that's why some politicians have been wary of it. However, with the coronavirus pandemic having affected so many people's incomes, I think now it would be much more acceptable to the public that actually nobody should drop below a certain level. So I'm hopeful that that is something that will move forward more quickly than it might have done, because there's more of a realization in the public at large that you might find yourself in a situation where you really needed that safety net. So I'm a bit optimistic that that actually might happen at some point. I think what I would say is that we have a manifesto commitment that every policy that goes through Parliament ought to go through a mechanism that involves organisations and individuals who are involved with that situation, whatever it might be, the lived experience plus the organisations that know all about it. Because you need to get policies right. A headline and a principle is fine, but if the implementation isn't right, it not only sometimes doesn't do what you hope it will do, you can have unintended consequences that are detrimental. So we want to avoid that, and we've got that as a manifesto commitment that any policy has to be done with the cooperation of the people most involved. The takeaway for me is about the premium poverty, the premium associated with poverty. Now, I knew about that in myself, but I will admit that's not actually in our manifesto about dealing with that situation, and we should deal with that situation. I'm actually the policy convener, the national policy convener for the Lib Dems, so that will be going back to my committee to say, well, what are we doing about this? We know it exists, we haven't got anything specific to deal with it, and we ought to. So that's what I'm taking away from this.
Thanks very much, everybody. We're a wee bit over time, but I hope that you appreciate that. I think it was a good conversation. There was lots of really interesting points made. I will make the same promise to the politicians this week as I did with the young people, that if you're elected, we will hunt you down and we will hold you to account for what you've said that you're going to do, in the best possible sense of being hunted down. Really appreciate that you are taking stuff away from these sessions. Appreciate you taking part. And very appreciative of Paul Gallagher's time and also Donna's time, because it's our new we don't have we do have a manifesto, but we have a new strategy, and it's called Being Brave. And part of what we want to do as an organisation is take brave steps towards supporting children and young folk, and using the voices of parents and children whenever we can. And we know how difficult that at times is for some of the professionals. It's even more difficult for families to step into the political arena and share stories directly with politicians. So I'm really appreciative that Donna and Paul have taken that brave step. And all that remains for me today to say is to wish you all the best in the remaining days of the campaign. I'm sure we'll see some of you, or maybe all of you, in Holyrood soon. And thanks again for coming along. Thank you. Bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thanks very much,
Thanks,
Paul.
Paul.